Have you ever been hurt so deeply by someone that your silence became louder than any words you could have screamed? Maybe you gave your loyalty, your honesty, your time, and they repaid it with betrayal. You stayed silent not because you were weak, but because something inside you knew noise wouldn't fix this. Maybe you've been told that silence is giving up, that not reacting is surrender. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the stillness after betrayal isn't a collapse, but a setup for a kind of comeback they never saw coming? That's the misconception we're breaking wide open today. Because the truth is, when someone wounds you and you choose not to fight back with vengeance, you enter a space of immense power. A quiet transformation begins, one that doesn't demand attention but always gets it eventually. And here's the twist. The very silence they mistook for weakness is what begins to haunt them. Not your revenge. Not your retaliation. Your peace. And isn't that the real justice? You see, we live in a culture that glorifies reaction. Make noise. Call them out. Clap back. But those who walk the Stoic path, those who walk the inner path, know better. Stoicism teaches us that peace is strength, that stillness is not absence of power but mastery of it. In this video, I'm going to take you deep into what really happens when you stop chasing closure and begin living with composure. You'll see why your silence is not just a personal choice, it's a reckoning. We're going to peel back the layers of illusion and uncover how your growth, your composure, your refusal to play their game, becomes a mirror too clear for them to avoid. And the longer they look into that mirror, the more they realize what they truly lost. This isn't about bitterness. It's not about revenge. It's about becoming untouchable, not by building walls, but by becoming so whole, so grounded, so aligned with truth that their chaos simply can't reach you anymore. That is the Stoic victory. This is the moment where personal growth becomes justice. This is where Stoic relationships reveal their real power, not in control, but in release. And in the end, their punishment isn't your anger. It's your absence. So if you've ever felt the weight of silence pressing on your chest after being betrayed, if you've ever wondered whether your calm was strength or cowardice, stay with me. Because the answer isn't just freeing, it's transformative. And by the end of this video, you won't just understand what your silence means. You'll own it. Completely. Ready? Let's walk into it. 1. The illusion of victory. They thought they won, didn't they? When they walked away, when they let go of your hand without flinching, when they betrayed the very foundation of what you gave in good faith, they believed they came out on top. Why? Because there were no fireworks, no dramatic confrontation, no public scene. Just silence. Your silence. And in a world obsessed with instant reactions, that quietness confused them. It misled them into thinking they had power, that they had the last word, that your absence was submission. But what if the very silence they mistook for weakness was actually the beginning of their undoing? What if in that stillness, the seeds of justice were already being sown, quietly, patiently, and with deadly accuracy? The truth is, people who hurt others often mistake lack of reaction as lack of consequence. That's the first illusion. The second is even more dangerous. They believe they've walked away unchanged. That they can burn bridges and still cross oceans without getting wet. But there's something deeper at play, something they don't understand. Reality has a memory. The universe, or call it the moral architecture of being, records actions in silence and collects debts without warning. So when they hurt you and expected nothing in return, they didn't account for the weight of what they did. They didn't realize that silence doesn't erase pain, it magnifies it in time. When they left you behind, maybe they imagined you'd crumble, beg, lash out, or spiral into something they could label or dismiss. But you didn't. You vanished, not in despair, but in strength. And that unsettled them far more than any explosion of emotion ever could. Because what kind of person doesn't react? What kind of soul absorbs betrayal, disappears into stillness, and then begins to grow? That kind of restraint isn't normal for those addicted to conflict, manipulation, or performance. You see, most people operate in cycles. They hurt, then expect a reaction. They manipulate, then anticipate pushback. It confirms their illusion of control. But when you don't play the role they scripted for you, when you choose stoic composure over chaos, you collapse the entire dynamic. Now they're left with themselves, their choices, their conscience. No distraction. No feedback loop. Just silence, and that's terrifying. Because silence reflects. Silence is a mirror. And what they see now is not your pain, it's their own character, stripped of justification. That's where the illusion of victory begins to decay. Initially, they celebrate. They posture. They rationalize. They move on quickly, perhaps even flaunting their new freedom or relationships. Maybe they mock your silence or use it to rewrite the story, framing themselves as the hero or the victim. But time, my friend, is merciless to false narratives. Time doesn't rush. It waits. And while it waits, it works. It decays lies from within and sharpens truths in the quiet. And in the space where you used to respond, time begins whispering in their ear, not your voice, but their own guilt, their own fear, their own regret. And here's the thing they don't see coming. When someone truly gave their best, when someone showed up with loyalty, integrity, and care, and they were discarded or wounded for it, that goodness doesn't vanish. It echoes. It lingers in memory. And the more they try to replace you, the more evident your uniqueness becomes. They will chase connection and find only comparison. They will seek peace and discover only noise. Because they didn't just walk away from a person, they walked away from something rare. Something they may never touch again. And the silence you gave them? That was your last gift. The final mercy. The chance to reflect without shame, to confront their actions without public exposure. But most don't use it that way. Most run. They fill the silence with distractions, people, noise, work, validation. Yet it never sticks. Why? Because it's not the world judging them, it's their own conscience. And no matter how far they go, they carry that with them. That's the justice of Stoic relationships. No external punishment necessary, no vengeance needed. Just the quiet truth of who you were, and who they chose to be. And when their illusions crack, when the relationships they rushed into falter under their own weight, when the image they tried to project begins to fade, they remember. Not with pride, but with ache. Not with triumph, but with a sense of loss so sharp they dare not speak it. And what makes it worse? You're no longer there. You're no longer accessible, available, or interested. The person who once waited for them to show up right is now focused on something far more powerful, your own evolution. And the realization hits, they didn't win. They just walked away from the one person who would have stood beside them through anything. They broke the mirror that reflected back their best chance at becoming better. And now, all they have is their own reflection. That is the illusion of victory unraveling. That is what your silence reveals, not immediately, but inevitably. That is the true Stoicism teaches, not through fire and noise, but through patience, alignment, and unwavering dignity. They thought they won. But the scoreboard was never theirs to read. And as you rise in silence, composed and clear, that illusion burns away, leaving only the reality they tried so hard to avoid. They hurt you, but they didn't realize the only person they defeated was themselves. 2. Transformation in the shadows. They never saw it happening. That's the thing about quiet growth. It doesn't need attention, doesn't crave validation, doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It builds like pressure beneath the earth, slowly, invisibly, powerfully. While they were busy writing you off, while they were performing for new audiences, while they were justifying their actions to themselves and others, you were doing something far more profound. You were transforming. Not for revenge, not for approval, but because pain has a way of forcing clarity, and clarity births evolution. Have you ever noticed how suffering rearranges your priorities? How being broken makes you question everything, strip your life down to its bones, and start rebuilding from the inside out? That's what was happening in the silence. They thought you were stuck, but you were actually shedding. Shedding illusions, attachments, expectations, false identities. The old version of you, the one they betrayed, doubted, underestimated, had to die for something stronger to be born. And that's what they'll never understand. The silence wasn't a void, it was a crucible. While they moved on without reflection, you were sitting in the fire, letting it burn away what didn't serve you anymore. Do you remember those long nights? The ones where you couldn't sleep, not because you missed them, but because something inside you was shifting? The chaos wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. You weren't healing like people expect, quickly, neatly, publicly. You were healing like roots grow, deep, hidden, relentless. That's why the transformation is so powerful now. It's not a performance. It's not for show. It's truth. And that truth has reshaped you. You no longer need to prove your worth because you discovered it in solitude. You no longer chase validation because you've anchored yourself in purpose. And the most incredible part, you've become untouchable to the things that once broke you. That is the power of Stoicism. That is the power of enduring suffering with your eyes open. Most people avoid pain. They distract themselves, deny it, deflect it. But you faced it. And because you faced it, you learned the kind of strength that can't be faked. Strength that doesn't shout, doesn't flex, it simply is. And now, that strength shows in how you move, how you speak, how you no longer explain yourself. It's in your boundaries, your focus, your calm. And the people who hurt you, they don't recognize you anymore. Because you've become someone they can't define. You've become someone they can't manipulate. You've outgrown their access. And that unsettles them. Because people who harm others depend on predictability. They depend on you being who you were, forgiving, soft, patient, emotionally available. But you've evolved. And now, their assumptions no longer apply. That version of you that waited for them to apologize? Gone. The one who needed closure? Doesn't exist anymore. What they see now is a reflection of their failure, not yours. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Your transformation didn't happen in a vacuum. It's affecting everything around you. The way you work. The way you show up in friendships. The way you command space without dominating it. You're building something solid, something sacred. A life of integrity. A rhythm of peace. A voice of reason. That's the essence of Stoic relationships, not built on passion alone, but on depth, clarity, and truth. And that's what terrifies those who wronged you. Because the more you rise, the more your silence speaks. And what does it say? It says, I healed without you. It says, I grew while you played. It says, you no longer belong in the life I'm building. That message is devastating to the ego. Because now they realize they didn't just lose someone, they lost someone who turned pain into power. And not loudly, but in stillness. You didn't post your progress. You didn't campaign for sympathy. You just evolved steadily, like a tide that no one can hold back. This transformation, it's not just a chapter in your story. It's the blueprint for the rest of your life. Because once you've rebuilt yourself from the ashes, no one can threaten you with fire again. You know what you're made of now. You know the price of your peace. And you protect it not with walls, but with wisdom. With boundaries. With focus. The kind of focus that scares people who thrive on distraction. That's the paradox of healing. It starts as survival, then becomes discipline, and finally turns into radiance. You begin to shine in a way that unsettles the very people who tried to dim you. Because your success isn't loud, it's undeniable. Your growth isn't revenge, it's revelation. And every step you take forward in authenticity is a step they can't follow. Because they stayed the same. That's their tragedy. While you suffered and transformed, they stayed shallow. They stayed in the performance. They stayed in the illusion of control. And now, they're watching you live in truth while they're still pretending. That's why your transformation haunts them. Not because it's meant to hurt them, but because it reveals their stagnation. They see what you've become, and it reminds them of who they could have been if they'd done the work. But they didn't. They chose comfort. You chose the fire. And now, the fire has forged you into something unshakable. This is what makes Stoic relationships powerful. Not their permanence, but the way they demand integrity. And when that integrity is violated, and you respond with silence and growth instead of rage and retaliation, the balance shifts. Now you're the one aligned. Now you're the one grounded. And alignment always creates gravity. People feel it. They notice it. They can't explain it, but they know something has changed. And that change becomes a silent message to the world. You're no longer available for chaos. You're no longer a participant in stories that don't honor your worth. Your transformation has rewritten your role in the story. And now, they're watching from a distance they created, hoping for an encore that will never come. They may reach out. They may test your boundaries. They may pretend they've changed. But you've seen too much. Felt too much. Grown too much. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just not interested. And that indifference? That calm detachment? That is what haunts them most. Because you're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're living proof that pain can purify. That loss can refine. That silence can speak louder than words ever could. You are the evidence that growth isn't always visible, but it's always felt. So if you've been walking your own quiet path of transformation, trust it. Even if no one claps. Even if no one sees the battle behind your peace. Keep going. Because one day, those who thought they won will look up and realize they can't even reach you anymore. And that's not revenge. That's reality. That's justice. That's the reward for not giving up on yourself when it would have been easier to break. And now that you're here, on this side of the fire, I want to hear from you. If you feel this message, if it resonates with your journey, like this video and comment number 1 below. Let me know you're rising too. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because this space is for people who are done shrinking, done explaining, and ready to live in truth. This is about becoming untouchable, not by hardening, but by growing. That's the path we walk together. Welcome to it. 3. The weight of unanswered guilt. Guilt is not a flash of emotion. It's not loud, not theatrical, not always visible. It's something slower, something quieter, something far more corrosive. It lingers in the margins of consciousness and waits, undisturbed, for the moment when silence becomes unbearable. When they hurt you, when they betrayed your trust, they thought their departure was the conclusion. But in truth, it was only the beginning of an internal unraveling they could neither predict nor escape. That unraveling doesn't start with punishment. It starts with memory. And memory, when laced with guilt, does not age quietly. It festers. It builds pressure. They may have walked away with pride, maybe even pleasure, thinking they were right, thinking their actions would dissolve with time, thinking you would simply become a footnote in their journey. But what they failed to grasp is that their guilt did not walk away with them. It walked inside them. It traveled with them to every new relationship, every new environment, every moment of false peace. You see, a person can deceive others for a while, maybe even deceive themselves for longer, but they can never outrun the silent courtroom of their own conscience. They may have justified what they did to you, perhaps spinning narratives that cast them in a better light. They might have convinced people that you were the problem or that the ending was necessary. But deep down they know. And that knowing, that buried truth, they can never escape. It surfaces at strange times. In stillness. In exhaustion. In the eyes of someone who reminds them of you. And in those moments the guilt speaks, not in sentences, but in feelings they can't explain. An unease that creeps in without warning. A tightness in the chest. A recurring dream. The need to stay busy, to never sit still long enough to listen. Because in the silence, the guilt starts whispering the truth. That they damaged something real. That they betrayed someone loyal. That they walked away from something sacred. And that whisper grows louder with time. At first, it's manageable. They numb it with distractions, new people, constant work, entertainment, performance. But guilt is not impressed by activity. It waits. And eventually, the cracks start to show. Not publicly. Not with grand collapse. but with subtle disintegration. They start questioning their choices. Their relationships feel hollow. They grow suspicious, even paranoid. Why? Because betrayal rewires perception. Once you've harmed someone who never deserved it, your ability to trust others begins to degrade. You start projecting your guilt outward. You expect others to lie, to leave, to deceive. Because deep down, you know you're capable of those very things. That's the weight of unanswered guilt. It doesn't stay buried. It leaks into everything. And they might pretend they're fine. They might smile, succeed, laugh loudly in the presence of others. But the storm is internal. It builds in quiet moments, in solitude, in the mirror. Because guilt doesn't just remind them of what they did to you. It reminds them of who they chose to become. That's what makes it unbearable. Not the memory of your pain, but the memory of their decision to cause it. The realization that when given the opportunity to do right by someone genuine, they chose selfishness, cowardice, betrayal. And no amount of distraction can silence that truth. This is the moral law that Stoicism understands. That justice is not always external. That sometimes, the most precise form of justice is internal implosion. And that implosion comes not from vengeance, but from conscience. It's the soul's way of demanding alignment. And until it is acknowledged, it continues to unravel the very foundation of peace. You didn't have to chase justice because it was already in motion the moment they violated it. You didn't need to expose them. Life does that. Slowly. Methodically. And perhaps most terrifyingly, silently. The person who once felt victorious will begin to feel watched, not by you, but by the truth. The kind of truth that sits quietly in the background of their life and casts long shadows over every moment of stillness. Guilt isolates. It causes restlessness in relationships. It drives people into cycles of overcompensation or avoidance. And sometimes, the person they try to be in the aftermath is built not on growth, but on denial. And denial is a fragile foundation. They may perform kindness, speak wisdom, pretend they've changed. But if that transformation was never preceded by accountability, then it's merely a costume. And costumes can't bear the weight of truth. Sooner or later, the mask slips. And when it does, they are left not with your forgiveness, but with the silence they never resolved. The silence they thought they could outrun. That silence is no longer yours. It belongs to them now. And it is filled with echoes. Echoes of your presence, your voice, your care, your honesty. They will try to forget you. They will try to delete the story. But the mind doesn't work that way. Especially not the conscience. And here's what makes it even heavier. The more you heal, the more your growth reminds them of their loss. Every step you take in truth becomes a reminder of the lie they chose. Every piece of peace you build becomes a mirror they can't look into without seeing their failure. And that is the punishment no one talks about. The slow, relentless erosion of self-respect in those who did wrong without repair. It's not dramatic. It's not visible to the world. But it's personal. It's precise. And it's permanent until reconciliation happens, and often, it never does. Because by the time guilt becomes unbearable, the damage is already done. And you've moved on. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. You're no longer carrying their debt. They are. That is the power of Stoic relationships. To love deeply, to hurt honestly, and to let go without vengeance. You don't need them to see your worth. You already know it. You don't need them to carry your pain. You've turned it into strength. And that strength now stands as a monument they can't ignore. They'll try. But the weight of what they did is heavier than any pretense they wear. It will follow them. In every quiet moment. In every failed connection. In every subtle reminder of what they chose to destroy. That is guilt's nature. It's not there to punish. It's there to teach. But not everyone listens. Some run from the lesson their entire life. And in doing so, they suffer, not because you cursed them, but because they cursed themselves the moment they violated truth. And here's where your role becomes sacred, not to fix, not to confront, not to wait. but to keep living in such a way that your presence becomes undeniable even in absence. Because you are no longer a part of their life, but you remain part of their conscience. And that's far more permanent. So if you're wondering whether they feel it, whether they carry it, the answer is yes. Not always on the surface. Not always openly. But guilt doesn't need permission to exist. It is the shadow they walk with now. And that shadow grows longer the more you rise in truth. That is the weight of unanswered guilt. Not just memory. Not just regret. But the deep, undeniable reality that justice, in the world of Stoicism, is often found not in punishment, but in the silent consequences of living out of alignment with one's soul. 4. Peace as the final word. There comes a moment, after the storms, after the tears, after the endless self-questioning, when peace arrives. Not as a dramatic event. Not as a gift from the person who wronged you. But as a quiet internal recognition that you've finally outgrown the chaos. That moment, that arrival, is not loud. It's not celebratory in the way others expect. It's calm. It's still. And it feels so foreign at first that you almost don't recognize it. But when you do, you realize that this peace, is the victory you didn't even know you were fighting for. Because in a world trained to equate noise with power, stillness is revolutionary. Peace is power. And peace doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't perform. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply exists, as the undeniable evidence that you've reclaimed your life on your own terms. They expected you to lash out. They waited for you to break, to come crawling back, to prove they still mattered. But when none of that came, when you didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't even speak their name again, that was the moment their illusion began to fall apart. You see, people who inflict pain often depend on your continued chaos to avoid their own. As long as you're reacting, they feel significant. As long as you're broken, they feel justified. As long as they occupy your emotional landscape, they get to pretend that their actions still hold weight. But peace starves their ego. It cuts off their access to your energy. It removes the stage they thought they owned. And when you finally step off that stage and into the sanctuary of your own soul, you begin to feel what true freedom is. It's not revenge. It's not exposure. It's peace. And peace is terrifying to people who only understand control. When your mind is no longer entangled with their memory, when your spirit no longer dances around the story they created, you've become untouchable. That is the essence of Stoicism. It doesn't tell you to be indifferent to pain. It teaches you how to move through it with discipline, clarity, and inner stability. It teaches you that your response is always your responsibility. And your greatest response is to no longer need a response at all. When you reach that kind of composure, you don't just win, you transcend. And that's where the pain they caused dies. Not because they apologized. Not because justice arrived. But because your soul stopped needing closure. That is peace. And here's the thing, peace doesn't come without a cost. It demands every ounce of discipline, every tear you refuse to let fall in front of them, every sleepless night you chose to endure in silence. But it also builds something nothing else can, a foundation so solid that nothing they say or do can shake it. You begin to live in a way that needs no explanation. You start creating, building, and thriving from a place that doesn't seek revenge but alignment. And that alignment creates distance, permanent, holy distance, between who you are now and the chaos they left behind. This is the power of Stoic relationships. They refine you. They force you to grow so deeply rooted in your own integrity that you no longer accept anything less from the world. And this is why peace, your peace, haunts them more than any retaliation ever could. Because now, your silence isn't empty. It's full of presence. Your stillness isn't passive. It's full of wisdom. Your absence isn't bitterness. It's a boundary they can't cross. And every time they try to test it, whether through a message, a vague post, a forced apology, they're met not with anger, but with a void. A sacred void that says, "You no longer have access here." And that is unbearable for those who believe access is eternal. They never thought they'd lose the version of you who was loyal, forgiving, open. But peace has changed you. It has matured you. It has given you new eyes. Ones that see through manipulation, that recognize insincerity, that detect even the slightest dishonesty. And because of that, your peace is no longer a reaction to their chaos. It's a declaration of independence. You don't need to explain your growth to anyone. The way you live now speaks volumes. Your glow, your boundaries, your direction, all of it is a language they can't unhear. And it says clearly, "You hurt me. I healed. You stayed the same. I evolved." And that evolution? That's what haunts them. Because you no longer engage in the story they thought they could control. You've stepped out of their narrative and written your own. And in that story, they are not the villain, the savior, or even the chapter break. They are simply a past event, one that no longer defines you. And the deeper your peace becomes, the more obvious that truth is to everyone around you. People begin to notice the shift, not just in your energy, but in your presence. You speak differently. You carry yourself with a calm that commands respect. And those who try to return to you find themselves confronting not the old version of you they once knew, but a new standard they cannot meet. That's the power of internal transformation. It doesn't just affect how you feel, it changes how others interact with you. They either rise to your level, or they fall away. And those who once hurt you, they can't rise, not because they're incapable, but because they haven't done the work. And your peace is a constant reminder of that work left undone. That's why it haunts them. It's not vindictive. It's reflective. And in that reflection, they see the truth. They had access to someone rare. Someone who didn't need to hurt back to heal. Someone who didn't need to scream to be heard. Someone who walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. And now they watch from the outside, realizing too late that they will never be part of this new version of you. This version is protected. Not by force, but by clarity. Not by walls, but by alignment. And that's the final word, not shouted, not screamed, but lived. Your peace is the full stop to their chaos. The exclamation point to their mistake. The quiet, irrefutable truth that you're no longer available to stories that dishonor your value. And that truth will follow them, not because you wish it, but because it is. So if you're walking in your peace today, know that it's not weakness. It's not detachment. It's the highest form of power. It's the reward for your suffering. It's the fruit of your discipline. It's the legacy of your healing. And if you're just beginning to find that peace, keep going. Don't rush it. Don't force it. Just protect it. Because once you arrive there, everything changes. Not the world, but you. And once you change, the world has no choice but to follow. So if you've made it this far in the video, and this message resonates with your journey, give it a like and comment number 1 down below. Let me know you're choosing peace over performance. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're not done. There's more to uncover, more to grow into, and more strength to claim. Peace isn't the end. It's the beginning of a life you finally deserve. Let's walk it together. 5. Time as the great revealer. Time. That silent, unrelenting witness to everything we do. It never rushes, never forgets, never favors one over another. And in the end, it always delivers justice, not by force or decree, but by exposure. That's the power time holds. It reveals. Slowly. Precisely. Completely. And when someone has wronged you, betrayed your trust, inflicted damage and walked away thinking they've escaped consequence, it is time that begins its invisible work. Not on your schedule, not according to your emotional urgency, but in its own perfect rhythm. In the immediate aftermath of harm, it often looks like they've won. They're laughing, posting, living, moving forward. You, on the other hand, are in pieces, barely holding your identity together. You ask yourself, where is justice? Where is the balance? But justice, according to Stoicism, is not about instant reaction. It's not about public spectacle. It's not about evening the score. It's about moral correction over time. Because no lie can outlast time. No deception can resist exposure when it's stretched across the seasons of life. What was once hidden, once distorted, will eventually emerge for what it truly is. Time peels away the illusions like layers of paint on a mask. At first, the colors are vibrant. The facade is convincing. But slowly, with every passing day, the cracks start to form. The lies require energy to maintain. The stories need reinforcement. And the person who once felt clever, who once believed they had succeeded in rewriting the past, begins to feel the pressure. Not from you, but from time itself. Their world starts to reflect their choices. Relationships become shallow, because depth requires truth. Trust becomes scarce, because trustworthiness was abandoned. And identity becomes fragmented, because it was built on a foundation that time is eroding with relentless patience. Meanwhile, your silence, your restraint, your choice to not retaliate is becoming your power. Because in the absence of your voice, the truth becomes louder. People begin to question. Inconsistencies appear. Reputations bend. And they're left grasping for the narrative they once controlled so easily. That's when the panic sets in. That's when time begins to show its hand. It starts with minor discomfort. A sense of being watched. A fear of being found out. An inability to rest deeply, to trust completely, to speak confidently. And all the while, you are rising. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But consistently. You are aligning with reality. Living with integrity. Healing with purpose. And that contrast, your stability against their performance, becomes undeniable. Time makes the difference obvious. It makes your resilience shine brighter and their actions appear darker. And that's the part they didn't calculate. They thought your silence was surrender. But it was simply the beginning of time doing its work. They didn't realize that every choice they made was a signature on a moral contract that time would one day collect. Because that's the law of the moral universe. You don't escape what you are. You might delay its consequences. You might distract from the truth. But you don't erase it. Not from time. And certainly not from yourself. And what happens internally begins to show externally. Anxiety. Paranoia. Fragile relationships. A constant need to manage perception. They're no longer living, they're managing an illusion. An illusion that is cracking at the edges. All the while, you no longer carry the weight of proving them wrong. You simply live well. Live clean. Live strong. You embody the very truth they hope to suppress. And that embodiment becomes their undoing. Because time doesn't just expose lies, it elevates truth. It validates the quiet ones. The ones who didn't scream. The ones who chose dignity. The ones who believed that integrity would outlast deception. And time proves them right. You start seeing it in small ways first. People who once believed the lie begin to distance themselves. The deceiver's story loses its power. Their name doesn't hold the same energy. Their charm no longer works. That's time, peeling back the layers. It's justice, but not in the way we usually think. It's justice without spectacle. Justice without confrontation. Justice delivered in the mirror they now have to look into every single day. Because truth is not just something you say, it's something you live. And when you live in alignment with truth, time becomes your ally. It protects you. It elevates you. And it carries your story forward in a way that no amount of manipulation can compete with. That's why Stoicism teaches patience, not as passivity, but as power. The ability to wait without giving in to chaos. The strength to trust that reality, not noise, decides the outcome. Time humbles everyone. It tests every foundation. And when someone builds their peace on lies, betrayal, or manipulation, time turns that peace into torment. Not because you wished it, but because they chose it. Their house of cards begins to sway. Their carefully curated image begins to falter. And the truth, your truth, rises like water through the cracks. You didn't need to push it. You didn't need to orchestrate it. You just needed to stay aligned. And time did the rest. And now, as the years pass, as the seasons change, they see what they truly lost. Not just you, but access to the kind of energy they can't replace. The loyalty they discarded. The honesty they underestimated. The clarity they took for granted. And most of all, the peace you now live in. The peace they can't find. That peace becomes a reflection they can't escape. It's not bitterness. It's not vengeance. It's simply what happens when time does what it always does, reveal. The longer you walk in truth, the more unshakable you become. The longer they hide from it, the more unstable they become. And that imbalance? That shift? That's justice. So don't doubt the silence. Don't second-guess the slow seasons. That's where time is doing its most sacred work. That's where the deeper laws are aligning. You don't need to hurry. You don't need to speak out of pain. Just keep walking. Keep growing. Keep building. Time is on your side. Because truth, once planted, always finds a way to grow. And in the end, time will reveal what intentions tried so desperately to hide. Always. 6. The echo of what they lost. There is something haunting about finality, about realizing that someone who was once there for you in full, with open heart and unguarded loyalty, is now gone without bitterness, without rage, without even a word of farewell. Because when you walked away, you didn't slam the door. You didn't set fire to the bridge. You simply faded into the background, took your peace with you, and left them with the silence they never expected to last. And what they didn't know then, but feel now with growing intensity, is that silence, that stillness, was not just your healing. It was your evolution. And now, that evolution echoes in every part of their life that used to be touched by your presence. At first, they didn't notice. They were too wrapped up in distraction, in justification, in the adrenaline of what they thought was freedom. But freedom built on the betrayal of someone loyal is never peace. It's only delay. A delay of the moment when the absence begins to speak louder than any words could. That's the echo. The echo of what they lost. And it doesn't arrive in a dramatic wave. It arrives in small, sharp stings. The jokes that no longer land, the quiet moments that suddenly feel colder, the way they keep looking for a version of you in people who can't measure up. They begin to feel it when they try to replicate the connection and fail. When they try to recreate the feeling of safety and honesty they once had with you and realize nothing compares. And maybe they don't say it aloud. Maybe pride or shame won't let them admit it. But inside, something unsettled stirs. Because they realize you weren't just another chapter, you were a turning point. A rare soul who offered something real in a world obsessed with performance. And they lost that. Not because of some tragic accident, not because of some external force. They lost it by choice. They gambled your loyalty for convenience. They traded depth for attention. And now your absence has become the measure of what they can't find again. That is the cost they never calculated. They thought they could replace you, fill your space with distractions, maybe even upgrade. But you don't upgrade from authenticity. You don't improve on integrity. You don't find substitutes for what's sacred. You either cherish it when you have it, or you learn the hard way once it's gone. And they're learning. Slowly. Painfully. Because your silence now acts like a mirror, reflecting not just who you were to them, but who they failed to be for you. And that reflection is sharper than any confrontation. It doesn't yell. It doesn't demand. It just exists. Unignorable. Unavoidable. Unforgiving in its accuracy. And what makes it even harder is that while they try to make peace with what they did, they realize you're no longer available for that process. You've grown. You've changed. You've become someone new, someone that doesn't need their apology to be whole. That version of you who was understanding to a fault, who waited, who forgave, who gave second and third and fourth chances, that version no longer exists. And they feel that loss not in your words, but in your absence. They see it in your composure, in your glow, in the way you no longer engage, no longer explain, no longer try. That stillness is deafening. Because now, they sit with the full weight of what they chose to walk away from. And it's heavier than they imagined. Because you weren't loud. You weren't dramatic. You were consistent. You were true. And when that's gone, everything else starts to feel fake. They begin to doubt the very relationships they moved on to. They begin to question their own motives, their own worth. Because the one person who saw them clearly, the one person who offered truth without agenda, is now beyond reach. That's when the echo gets louder. It creeps into their sleep, into their quiet mornings, into the pauses between laughter. And the haunting realization that they can't go back becomes permanent. That no matter what they say now, no matter how much they've grown, they'll never be invited into your new life. Because your new life is built on boundaries they can't cross. It's rooted in self-respect they helped you discover. That's the irony. In hurting you, they made you stronger. In abandoning you, they taught you how to be whole alone. And now that you've become that, you don't need them, not to explain, not to apologize, not to validate. And that independence? That untouchability? That is the echo that follows them. It's not punishment. It's not spite. It's consequence. And consequences always arrive. Not always with force, but always with clarity. They see you now. Not as the wounded version they once dismissed, but as the risen version they no longer deserve. And that shift, that irreversible change in how you see yourself and how the world now sees you, is what keeps them haunted. Because they know they had something rare. And they let it go, thinking it would always be there. That you would always be there. But now, they understand the truth. When you lose someone who had every reason to walk away sooner, who stayed longer than they should have, who loved harder than they were loved in return, that loss hits different. It's not just about what's gone. It's about what can never be restored. And the echo of that loss doesn't fade. It lingers. It plays on repeat. And it becomes the backdrop to every new beginning they attempt. That's what makes Stoic relationships so powerful. They are built with intentionality, depth, presence. And when they end, especially when they are violated, they leave behind an echo so profound, it recalibrates the lives of those who walked away from them. You don't need to do anything for that echo to work. You don't need to broadcast your wins or highlight their losses. Your peace is the loudest echo. Your boundaries are the clearest reflection. Your joy, unshared with them, is the most honest closure. So if you're in that space now, where your silence is speaking volumes, where your presence is no longer theirs to enjoy, embrace it. Not with arrogance, but with certainty. You've done the work. You've earned your healing. And now, you get to live in the reward, a life where you no longer shrink, no longer chase, no longer wait. A life that reflects your worth back to you every single day. Let that be enough. Let that echo carry on without needing your voice. Because it will. And if this part of the journey speaks to you, if you feel the weight of what they lost, and the power of who you've become, then show it. Like this video, and comment number 1 down below if it resonates with your truth. Let's keep growing, keep rising, keep building lives that reflect who we truly are. And subscribe if you haven't already. This space is where Stoicism meets transformation, where real stories meet real strength. Because your story isn't over, it's just beginning. And the echo of what they lost? That's just the sound of your life moving forward. At the end of it all, after the heartbreak has passed, after the anger has cooled, after the silence has settled into something solid and permanent, what remains is peace. Not the kind you expect. Not the cliché version sold on coffee mugs and inspirational posters. No, this peace is earned. It is shaped in the crucible of suffering, tempered by nights of doubt, built on the ruins of shattered expectations. It is not given to you. It is carved out of you, chiseled by your discipline, your restraint, your refusal to let someone else's cruelty define your future. And when it arrives, it does not announce itself. It slips in quietly, a gentle awareness that you no longer carry the weight. That the past still exists, but no longer owns you. That the people who broke you no longer have a vote in your life. That is the peace we're talking about. The kind of peace that does not need revenge, because it has outgrown the very need for enemies. The kind of peace that stands not in spite of what happened, but because of what you did with what happened. There's a sacred strength in knowing you made it out, not just alive, but evolved. There's a gravity to your presence now. One that only those who've walked through fire and refused to burn can understand. And those who hurt you, they feel that gravity. Not because you speak of them, but because you don't. Not because you punish them, but because you don't have to. Your life is the proof. Your growth is the evidence. Your serenity is the verdict. And that verdict is final. There's no appeal. No retrial. They had their chance to walk with you in honesty, and they chose otherwise. That choice has consequences, silent, but permanent. That is the justice of reality. The architecture of being corrects itself. Not always publicly. Not always when you want it. But always. And the beauty is, by the time it happens, you no longer need it. That is the paradox of healing. You crave justice when you're wounded. But once you've healed, you crave nothing but distance. You no longer want to see them hurt. You don't even want to see them at all. Not because you're bitter. Because you're free. And freedom doesn't look back to see who's watching. Freedom walks forward. That's what peace is, forward motion. Not fueled by anger. Not driven by regret. But guided by something higher. A sense that your life is now aligned with truth. A sense that your energy is finally yours again. A sense that you're no longer accessible to the dysfunction that once felt familiar. And that kind of peace isn't common. It's not flashy. It's not always celebrated. But it's unshakable. It holds you steady when life tests you again, and it will. Because peace is not immunity. It's mastery. It's the ability to navigate storms without losing your center. To speak truth without raising your voice. To set boundaries without anger. To love again without fear. That's where this journey has led you, not just away from pain, but toward wisdom. And wisdom changes everything. It doesn't make you cynical. It makes you clear. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you discerning. You learn to see through things faster. You learn to value stillness more. You learn to trust your instincts without needing permission. And those lessons, they were bought with a price. The betrayal. The heartbreak. The silence. But you paid it. And now you own the life that followed. You walk differently now. You listen differently. You love differently. Not with desperation, but with depth. Not with fear, but with boundaries. Because you've seen what happens when you give everything to someone who hasn't earned it. And you've promised yourself never to do that again. That promise is sacred. It's the covenant between your old self and the new one. Between the version that waited and the one that walks. Between the version that pleaded and the one that releases. Between the version that suffered silently and the one that lives loudly, without making a sound. That's the journey. That's the lesson. That's the real transformation. You are no longer proving anything to anyone. You are no longer chasing closure. You are no longer playing a role in someone else's redemption fantasy. You are simply living, fully, clearly, with your head high and your spirit intact. And those who once misunderstood you, they no longer matter. Not because they're evil, but because they're irrelevant. Your story moved on, and they stayed behind. Not because you forced them to, but because they chose not to grow. And your life now has no space for stagnation. It's a sacred thing to walk forward without resentment. It's a powerful thing to remember and still not return. It's a rare thing to lose everything you thought you needed and realize you were always more than that. And that realization? That's the final note in this song. Not anger. Not closure. Not victory. Just peace. Deep, unshakable, undeniable peace. And if that's where you're heading, if that's the road you're choosing, then know this, you're not alone. This is the path of Stoicism. This is the path of those who no longer wish to win the fight, but to leave the battlefield entirely. This is the path of those who turn pain into purpose, silence into strength, endings into beginnings. This is the path of the free, the untouchable, The truly powerful. Not because they control others, but because they've mastered themselves. And you? You're already on your way. Keep walking. The peace you feel now? It's not the end of your story. It's the foundation of everything you're about to build. And the best part? You don't need anyone to see it. You just need to live it. Quietly. Powerfully. Irrefutably. That is your justice. That is your legacy. That is your peace. And it is more than enough.